Hi guys, and welcome back. So today is going to be a watercolor and ink painting, and this is actually a much bigger piece than I have worked on in kind of a while now. After I graduated, I was really kind of done with having the requirements of sizes and these very strict steps that I had to take to reach a final piece. And I kind of went the opposite direction after I graduated, where I wanted to do lots of really small pictures where I didn't have to do nearly as many color studies beforehand, and I could just go from the initial concept into actually working on it and painting really, really fast. And at the time, and for many months, because I've been graduated almost a year now, not quite, but close. But for that amount of time, that is what I needed to recharge on my traditional stuff. I think it really helped me enjoy each one and just be able to bust them out. But I'm realizing that now is the time for me to change the way that I'm working. I want to work in ways that are more thought-provoking for myself. So when I'm working on it, it takes a little bit more of me planning. So for this one, I ended up doing 2 stages of coloring comps, which I'll get to in a little bit where you can see it. But that's something that I had to do in class a lot more, where we had to figure those out in multiple steps, and you spent a lot more time delving into that. And I really love that. I love being able to get a firm grasp on what I'm going to do and to have that thought process and to be able to think, how can I show what I want to show in this piece and how do I get the mood in there? So basically, I'm just really excited about getting back into working that way a little bit more, being a little bit more thoughtful about all the steps that I'm taking. And I'm kind of going to try to make myself follow some of the steps that I had to take for a lot of my classes. Specifically for the watercolor one, we had to do at least one, usually depending on the assignment and the size of the final piece that we had to do it in, you had to do at least one color comp that was a pretty good size. Like, honestly, the color comps that I had to do for that piece were sometimes like the same size as my finished pieces that I do a lot of times. So I had to do one of those and a value study. And I didn't do a value study for this one, and I probably should have, and I'll do it more in the future. But for this one, I had a pretty good idea of how I wanted the values to be laid out. And since it's relatively simple of a composition, there weren't a lot of different objects going on that I had to make sure were balanced out. So that one, I was okay with skipping this time, but I was trying to be very dutiful about doing all the color comps for this one. And this one, I started off with a bunch of really, really tiny ones where I just got really the bulk coloring down. And then I took 2 of my favorites and turned those into larger color comps, where I could really figure out what colors specifically I would use and how I would lay them out and how I would do the values and how I would overlay different colors. So I'm really, really very happy that I did it that way, especially for a piece this big, because there was a lot of things going on and I wanted to make sure that I knew what the mood was going to look like when I started. That way, obviously, it can turn into the way I want. I mean, I'm saying all these things, but these are, things that I really should be doing. And for the most part, I do, especially when I'm doing pieces this large. I just really enjoy the way that digital art is, where I can just start working on it right away and I can change the colors as I work on it. And that's really the biggest thing that really differentiates traditional from digital for me, is the fact that I have to be a lot more thoughtful about it before I get into it. I have to know what I'm doing. But anyways, a little bit about this piece specifically, now that I'm done all the rambling, is I actually did a combination of different line tools. So I started off with the Copic Multiliners for her face and her hair and most of the bodice details, because those are really great for getting very precise, reliable lines. And I'm feeling really actually pretty confident with a brush and ink, but I still feel like when I'm getting in there and getting really, really fine details, I'm never always 100% confident that I'm not going to completely mess it up, or that there's not going to be some errant hair in my brush that's going to get a little bit of ink where it's not supposed to be. So I actually really enjoyed being able to have that really, really rigid nib in these multiliners, to be able to go in there and know exactly what's going to happen, and to be able to rely on building up the line work rather than needing to get it in one stroke like you kind of have to with the brushes. So that really solved kind of that little bit of apprehension I had before I started, where I was a little bit nervous that I was going to mess up her face and I was going to screw up this whole giant, beautiful piece of watercolor. So, watercolor paper, that is. So I was really happy with this method of combining two of my favorite ways to do line work into a way that each one could provide their biggest benefit. So after I did the stuff with the pens themselves, I went in with the brush and the ink. And this is perfect for doing these really sweeping S curves that you find a lot in her clothing. And if I were to do that with a micron pen, that would absolutely destroy my hand. And once I started learning, really dedicating myself to figuring out how to do it with a brush, it has taken a whole load of strain off of my hand and my wrist and my fingers, and I just feel so much better about being able to do these really swooping lines, and it does not nearly as tedious as it is with micron pens. So that is really the biggest benefit for using the brush and the ink in this piece specifically, is that I was able to really get the motion that I wanted without overstraining my hand. So that was great. And also, if you're interested, I'm going to have links to all of the tools and everything that I'm using down in the description, so you can check out any of that. And that's where you can see what kind of ink I'm using and brushes and all that stuff. But yeah, so I got the line work done. And this time I actually had the forethought to take a picture, a nice, clear, very stable picture of the line work itself, because I always regret it. I'll paint a picture and then regret not having the line work, because a lot of times I will paint a picture and even if I like the final outcome, I just really love the pure line work alone without any paint or anything on it. And a lot of times I will paint it up and I'll remember that I didn't take a picture, and then I regret it because I wish that I could still have just the line work to look at, to color, whatever I want to do with it. I just missed that. So I did make sure that I did it for this one. And it just gives me like this peace of mind knowing that I didn't like totally throw all that work away. And when I'm starting to paint, there's always that apprehension that I'm going to ruin this piece, and knowing that I have that backup just kind of gave me this peace of mind. And working on it felt a lot better, being able to have that. And I did mention at the beginning that this is both a watercolor and an ink painting. I really wanted to try doing more with these fountain pen inks that I have, because they keep their saturation a lot more. That's the biggest thing that I think I don't like about watercolor, is that I want them to be more saturated. I love how they react. I love using them and that tactile feeling, and I love the texture you can create with them, but I don't like how desaturated they end up. And it's always frustrating when you put down like this really gorgeous color and then it dries into this more medium-y tone, desaturated color. So I really wanted her dress to be very emerald. I wanted it to have this jewel tone brilliance to it that I was worried I wouldn't be able to get that color purity in the watercolor, so I wanted to try combining it with these fountain pen inks. And for the most part, I'm pretty happy with it. They do behave a little bit differently than watercolor. These are water soluble inks though, so I can mix water in with them and it'll lighten them up, and they can dissolve in water a little bit, but these are not nearly as spreadable once you add water as watercolor is. So when I would go in, it would dry a lot faster, whereas when I'm trying to do like a gradient with watercolor, I can blend that out a lot more beautifully and it'll get this really seamless gradient. But with the inks themselves, they like sucked into the paper like immediately, so you could kind of see some of the areas where I briefly stopped, where with watercolor it wouldn't have been at all a problem, but with the ink it did seep in there, so you can see some of the edges there. And that's okay. It's one of those things that I'd like to learn how to control it a little bit better, because I do love the brilliance of using these inks. But they do have their limitations, just like watercolor has its own limitations. And at one point when I'm kind of in the middle of doing this dress, I started to realize that I had kind of done the whole area the same value, and that is really bad because it was this huge shape in the composition and it all looked the same. Everything was blending in, and I needed to be able to have layers and this differential happening so that you could actually tell that there is this change in plane within her dress, and it needed depth and it was really lacking it. And that was the point where I was starting to get worried about this piece. And all of my traditional pieces, I have that point where I'm like, oh no, I really screwed up. I'm not going to be able to fix this. But I reminded myself that I can fix it and it was going to be okay. And that's when I decided that I needed to put a yellow glaze up at the top, right where the skirt starts to come out of the bodice, and blend it out to the rest of her dress. And by the way, if you're using watercolor and you have a green down and it looks really flat and uninteresting and not very bright and saturated, put a glaze of yellow over it. It looked so gorgeous when I put it down. I was so excited. It really did bring the life back into that green color, and it really added a lot of saturation to it that I felt like it was missing. And it was really great, and I loved how it looked. But the biggest thing was that it gave this really nice gradient of where it was more of a yellow green around her, and then it faded out to a much more blue green. So it was really cool around the edges and warm towards the top in the center. And then I also end up doing her hair a very warm tone, so that just connects the two and gives a little bit more harmony to the whole piece itself. So once I started adding in those very specific color gradients, it really helped fix that issue that I had where everything looked very homogeneous. But that is it for this piece. I just really loved working on something this big because it took so long to complete. There was a couple of days in there. So being able to wake up and have a piece waiting for me just felt so energizing and exciting and motivating in a way that I really haven't felt towards my traditional pieces in a little while. I haven't felt that like there's something waiting for me feeling, and I like that a lot. So yeah, overall, I really love this piece. I will have the original up on my shop, and if any of you guys are interested in a print of this, please let me know. I will probably add one eventually, maybe, but if you guys are interested, I can add it sooner rather than later. But yeah, that is it for today. Oh, and if you want to check out my art shop, there's a link right in the corner of my video and down in the description. And like I said, you can find links to all the tools that I used in the description as well. Whew. So that is it for today, and I will see you guys at my next one.